Money, money, money. It's the thing that drives the world, but also it drives the economy in Valorant. Now, we all know the simple stuff, like buying when everyone buys and saving when everyone saves. But what about the in-between rounds? What about stuff like anti-eco or how to buy it out most effectively? When are these strats actually the most optimal? Well, let's jump into this advanced economy guide. But before we get started, I have a challenge for you. I want you to smash that subscribe button with only your knee. That's right, only your knee. And frankly, I don't think you could do it, but if you can, definitely let me know in the comments down below because I'll be thoroughly impressed. Now, as a refresher course, let's go through really quickly what makes you money in the game of Valorant. Well, you get 200 per kill, pew pew, $200, easy as that. Click ahead and pass go, you get $200. Now, for the next one, you get 3,000 credits for a round win. That is the fattest amount of credits you can get from any single thing. Now, for the first round loss, you're gonna get 1,900. For the second round loss, you're gonna get 2,400. And for the third round loss and every preceding repetitive round loss, you're gonna get 2,900 credits. Still not as much as you would have got if you won. So winners make more money. That's true in life and it's true in Valorant. Now, the last thing is you get 300 credits for the entire attacking team if you plant the spike. So the important thing to understand because of this is that attackers have an inherent money advantage, because the same is not true for defusing. You don't get that same advantage. So that's something to keep in mind. Attackers will be slightly richer than defenders, but defenders also have a whole bunch of other advantages, so it kind of balances out. Now I have to talk about the obvious, which is the options that you have per round will change as a team based on wins, losses, plants, and player individual kills every single round you play. Now let's break down the most important and untraditional rounds and what you can do depending on price points and team price and individual price and things like that. Now let's talk about first off the second round after you won the first round, because you are a goat and you clicked every head. You just carried your entire team on your back, unlike what I would do, which is die instantly, have my buddy carry me, and yeah, take all the credit. So this is what you do if you won the first round, and this is the second round. So you're gonna get that 3,000 credits. And if you were on attack and you planted a spike, that's gonna be 3,300 credits, which is important. It's a little bit more. I'm gonna talk about why that's important in a second. Now, assuming that you spent all your money, you would need at least 3 kills on attack to buy full armor, because that's gonna be a whopping 600. Then you're gonna have that 3,300 because you get the 300 from the plant, the 600 from the kills, and the 3,000 from the win, which is gonna be 3,900, which means you could buy an AR full armor with no abilities. Now, if you did kill 4 or 5, you could easily upgrade to that full armor and abilities. You could just ball out on attack. You got the spike down, you won, you got 4 or 5 kills, then you could just like max out your character right there. Full armor, full abilities, full everything, get an AR to go with it, straight up for the second round, and the enemy is gonna probably be saving, so you're just gonna have such a better advantage against them. But this is a really obscure scenario. Now, while that sounds like the dream scenario, honestly, that's not gonna happen. Now, something that you might have done in the past is buy something like a SPECTRE, for example. But here's the problem with on the second round buying a SPECTRE, because if you buy a SPECTRE or you use all your money on the second round and you can't get up to those ARs, the next round, the enemy is actually going to be able to buy ARs even if they lose both the first and second round. Then you're going to be at an inherent disadvantage, and you do not want to be at an inherent disadvantage, of course. So what is the thing that you could do to make it so that you always have the advantage after you win that first round? Well, let's actually decide what you should do based on the team play. Now, sure, if you could buy the AR plus armor, if you're not a character that relies on abilities, that's fine to buy, because as long as you keep it, the next round, you will still have it and you'll be fine. At the very least, one of your allies can pick up the AR if you win the round. So at least the AR is in the pool. So that is fine. It's a lot better than buying a SPECTRE and then just being stuck with a SPECTRE, because you can't just sell it back to the market for your value back and then upgrade it to an AR. You just can't do that. So for the majority of players on the team, from that 3,300 or 3,000 to that 3,500 credits, you will have to compromise on what you buy. You can't just spend all your money, because we talked about before, you're going to be stuck. Even if you win, you're going to be stuck with a weapon that can't compete with ARs. So yes, some players on your team are going to want to buy more than the basics because you want to ensure that you win that second round. If you buy too light and the enemy forces or just buys at parity, then you might not get that actual advantage, which is the important thing. Now, yes, everyone on your team could just buy light armor plus ghost, but the enemy could also buy light armor plus ghost, or they could even force buy above that. And like I said before, you never want to be in a scenario where players are above you by a large margin. You want to make sure that you snowball that one round win to an advantage in the second round, an advantage in the third round, and hopefully the fourth and fifth round. Now, as long as you buy it down to about 1,000 credits, if you win, you will be able to buy an AR in the preceding round, but only if you win. And if you lose and you bought down to 1,000, then you're going to be forced to eco, so there is a bit of risk involved. Now, if you are slightly richer, however, slightly richer than your team because you got a couple of kills, buying a weapon like a MARSHAL after you finish the first round and you won it could be very powerful because often on the second round, players on the enemy team won't buy armor at all. You could play completely outside of their effective range, and being able to one-shot body shot them when they don't have any armor means that the MARSHAL is just a very cheap op, which is incredible. It can allow you to shut down sidelines, and it's really, really strong. Now, going back to the original question and the original conversation, what if you don't buy enough to actually give you a sizable advantage? Well, you see, enemies could have also traded kills, so they could buy better weapons if someone on the enemy team has a lot of kills. Also, they could force, like we talked about, and we'll get to whether or not forcing is good or not, but ultimately, they could have some amount of powerful weaponry. So typically what pro teams have been doing is about 3 or 4 players will get a ghost pistol light buy, and then 1 or 2 players will buy a much stronger weapon, like whatever they can buy, whether it's all the way to that AR if they popped off, or if it's 2 armor plus bulldog or whatever. And the reason that they do this is they want to make sure that they give themselves a sizable enough advantage to ensure that they win that second round. Ensure. And you might be asking, okay, so even if they win that second round, then the big problem that comes up is, okay, now going into the third round, the whole enemy is going to buy ARs, so wouldn't they be at a disadvantage because a couple of them are going to have these weapons like a bulldog? Well, you might think that inherently, but it's not true, because what a player can do if they go down to that 2,500 credits, but they win the next round, which you're ensuring because several of you are buying, is they will get snowballed another 3,000 credits at least, maybe 3,300 or more, especially if they're on attack. And what does that allow them to buy? That's right, it allows them to buy operators. And then the next round will be a combination of a couple of ops, a couple of weapons like a bulldog, and maybe like 1 AR. Now, what this does is it actually ups the power level overall to still an advantage over the enemy team, even if it's not bounced across the board. And as long as you trade out some picks, get that numbers advantage, even with worse weaponry, you can still turn that into a round win. Now, the next thing we gotta talk about is the second round when you lost. Now, this is more interesting because it could dramatically change based on attack, defense, what your goal is as a team, and team individual preference. Now, the most basic way is just to play all cheap, classics and abilities only. You make a rush play or a joint hold play where you try to trade out as much as possible. You can make a rush play where you collapse on the enemy by pushing in really aggressively or out the same area. You can make a potential joint hold play where multiple members of your team can stack at one point. Sometimes you can even do something that teams have done, which is a hard read, where you legitimately pick one side and you go for a Hail Mary 50-50 chance that they push that side. You gang up on the remaining members of the enemy team, whatever they are. You gang up on that one member that pushes that side of those 2 members, and then essentially what you're trying to do is force trades, take their weapons and play for the retake, because if you can't win the round, it's fine, but if you get a lot of kills and prevent the enemy from snowballing even more, that is going to be great for you down the line. Now, regardless of whatever you do, if you are on attack, you want to do whatever you can to get that spike down, because that 300 money might not seem like a lot, but it is a very big deal. Now, 2,400 money gain turning into 2,700 money gain can be a huge difference. Let me give you this example to help you understand. Let's say you lost the first round and spent all your money, and then you gain that 1,900 credits for losing. Now, you went down to 1,300 credits just buying your abilities, but if you lose in plants, even if you didn't get any kills, you're gonna get that 2,400 credits plus that 300 credits going up to 4,000. So basically what I'm saying is even if you lose, you can still buy an AR plus armor as long as you get the spike down. So make it a priority to get that spike down if you're on attack every single time. Now, some teams, even in pro play, will force buy on that second round, especially on a map like Ascent. They don't want the enemy team to be able to snowball into ops, so they're doing everything they possibly can to stop that. And what they do is they actually force buy. Many members of the enemy team force buy. Now, what this could do is this can mix up an enemy who bought barely to 2K. They're trying to be really greedy. All 5 of them are only rocking something like Ghost because they are trying to be as greedy as possible. They want to barely eke out the round. They're not willing to invest money. But if you force buy, or some number of you force buy, you can really put a lot of pressure on them, turn a round that they should have won, and then because you force them down to that 1,900 credits win, a lot of them, if they bought at all, won't be able to buy up. And of course, even if they did save, they're not going to be able to buy ops, which is very important. You stop that op snowball. Now, here's the trick though. If you are forcing, pretty much all of you should be forcing. There's no point in having super lopsided eco forever, because a lot of times, if like one of you forces and every one of you saves, then the next round, all the people that saved could get better guns, but the one person that forced can't. And then you just have this lopsided eco that just is terrible. So as a general rule of thumb, if some of you are forcing, all of you should force. If some of you are saving, all of you should save. General rule of thumb, unless you have a specific strategy that you're trying out as a team. Now, as a last tip, talking about force buys, make sure that you try to isolate as much information as possible on the enemy before you get picks on them. Because if the entire enemy team know that you're force buying, they could play fundamentally different. So don't just beeline it down mid. Really try to make sure that you keep a tight cap over the weapons that you have. Sometimes it's even better to fake it with a classic pistol and then whip out the actual good gun if you have something like a Stinger or something like that that the enemy doesn't expect. Now, the next big topic is when to buy when slightly richer than your team on a save round. So you know that your team is poor and they can't buy, but you got a whole bunch of kills, so you're richer than them. Maybe your team is at like 1,900 credits and you're at like 3,000 plus. Well, there are 4 different things that I would suggest to buy if you're slightly richer, but you want to try to get some kills, you want to mess up the enemy's economy, maybe clutch it out for your team with a couple of picks here and there. The first thing is the Sheriff, and this is the most common weapon that people are rocking. The Sheriff is seeing a lot of play in pro play, the trusty Western 6-shooter. The thing is, Sheriff is just very good at trading up in value. You get that headshot, you can kill an enemy that has a much better gun with you from that mid to close range, and that's just pretty much why it's being used. And the thing is, it's so cheap that if you have just a little bit more money than your allies, you can buy a Sheriff and you can use it to turn the tables. If you get a couple of picks, all of a sudden the round is winnable, even though most of your team has saved, because you can kill people with better guns, your teammates can steal those guns, or you can, and then all of a sudden it's now swung in your favor, and that's the power of the Sheriff. Now, the next weapon when you're slightly richer than your team is a Marshal. The Marshal is actually surprisingly very, very strong. I mean, a headshot just ends matchups outright. A body shot is actually not very bad if you're farther enough away to where enemies can't trade out with you, which is normal. Marshal is extremely underrated, and the fact that it can trade up with value is the same thing as the Sheriff. And that's the common theme about all these guns that you buy when you're slightly richer, is you buy guns that have the capability of trading up in money value. Now, the next weapon in this category is the Stinger, and the Stinger, honestly, I underestimated. The Stinger is just way too powerful. It's seeing pro play, it's seeing play in high level ranked. Stinger just kills people so fast, and it's really, really cheap. From close range, it is more consistent than shotguns are by quite a large margin, and its time to kill is so fast. A Stinger is a great weapon, especially if you're holding a close point or if you're holding a close angle as someone like Jet. Stinger can definitely get a lot of value and can mess up the enemy's eco, maybe get some kills in the process. Now, the last thing that you could get is, well, nothing. I mean, honestly, sometimes just, even if you're richer than your allies, just buy nothing and just snowball to an op or sandbag your money for later. You never know when you're going to need it. And this might be the most common and most consistent way. It's not the most flashy way. It doesn't have a lot of carry potential, but sometimes just consistency is the best. Now, the last category we're going to talk about is when you are balling over 9,000 credits. Just kidding, you can only stop at 9,000. But if you're really hard balling, what do you do? What do you do to give yourself the best advantage? Well, the first thing is you should make sure you buy a secondary. Especially if you're opping, you should be buying a secondary most of the time because it just gives you a little bit more of firepower in that secondary slot. The next thing you could do is upgrade a teammate. Pretty simple, but upgrade a teammate's guns. Upgrade them to an AR if they don't have it. Upgrade them to that op if they need it. Just upgrade some teammates, and especially all your allies that have ops, you can just buy them secondary weapons. Now, the last thing that you could do, especially if it's a round where you're balling out and it's the last round or whatever, buy an op with your AR. Buy both of them. You could scope along sightline. If enemies push onto the other site and you want to have a retake weapon, you drop your op for an AR, and that could be a way. Or let's say your team is playing attack on default like Haven, for example. You could drop an op in the middle so that any of your teammates can use the op, but they can switch back to their primary weapon when they don't need it. But this is a very rare scenario, but it's definitely something you should keep in mind. If there's any questions or comments that you have about this advanced economic guide, definitely let me know in the comments down below. But before you leave, smash that subscribe button. If you're already an eco god, or now you are, do me a huge solid, smash that subscribe button. But thanks for coming by. That's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.